Chapter 1. The Lease of the Sky. The contract arrived with no fanfare, slipped through the mail slot with the weightlessness of a passing breeze. It bore no official seal, no stamp of corporate authority, just a signature at the bottom, written in ink that shifted under the light as if alive. No one questioned where it came from. In the financial district, contracts were currency, and currency was never turned away. At first, the changes were imperceptible. The sky above Christopher Lang's office shimmered with a faint iridescence, as though oil had been spilled across its surface. He noticed it during lunch, watching the clouds ripple like liquid, but dismissed it as a trick of the glass. Then came the rain, not over the entire city, but just his building. It fell upward. From his window, Christopher stared as droplets reversed their descent, rising from the pavement and vanishing into the sky. People on the street below noticed too, pausing to gawk, snapping photos. Some laughed, chalking it up to a bizarre atmospheric phenomenon. Others frowned, muttering about weather manipulation gone wrong. The lease had promised exclusive rights to a portion of the sky above his office. It hadn't mentioned that the sky itself would behave unnaturally. A week passed, and the abnormalities deepened. The sunlight filtering into his office now carried hues not seen in nature. Violets and greens blending together, a shifting kaleidoscope. The clouds grew restless, forming words in twisting, illegible script, messages written by something unseen. His coworkers grew uneasy. They didn't speak of the contract, but he knew they could feel it in the air. Then his shadow lagged behind him. Christopher first noticed in the elevator mirror. His reflection moved normally, but his shadow hesitated, dragging a half-second late. His stomach twisted. He turned sharply, watching as the silhouette at his feet adjusted itself lazily, as though waking from slumber. And the next day, it moved when he did not. Christopher sat at his desk, fingers frozen over his keyboard, his breath shallow. His shadow rose from the floor in the reflection of his office window, stretching unnaturally. It flickered, distorted like a poor signal, then formed fingers that twitched and curled, not in sync with his own hands. Something was wrong. He reached for the contract, rifling through papers, scanning the fine print. The ink squirmed under his gaze, shifting, refusing to be understood. The signatures at the bottom blurred, distorting his name as if his identity itself was unraveling. The lease was inescapable. Outside, the sky split apart, revealing something vast and watching. Chapter 2. The Man Who Rents the Sky. Christopher first saw him standing beneath a street lamp, though the light didn't quite touch him. The man was tall, impeccably dressed, his suit the shade of an evening sky moments before the stars emerge. There was nothing outwardly unusual about him, until he moved. Each step he took seemed detached from time, like he was walking between moments rather than inside them. The briefcase at his side looked too thin to hold anything substantial, yet when he opened it, there was an undeniable depth, a sky trapped inside leather folds. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he watched. Not Christopher, something behind him. "Your shadow," the man said finally, his voice carrying an odd resonance, as if two tones overlapped in speech. "It's restless." Christopher glanced down, half expecting his shadow to twitch. It did not, but he felt the weight of its gaze regardless. The man reached into his briefcase. Papers slid from the depths, neatly stacked. "You've already signed," he continued, almost amused. "But we never spoke, did we?" Christopher hesitated. He wasn't sure what the man meant, whether this was an invitation or a warning. "What are you?" he asked. The man smiled. It was the kind of smile that pressed against reality, something too precise, too intended. "A facilitator, a broker, a necessary function." He held out the papers, though Christopher made no move to take them. The words on the contract shimmered like heat waves, refusing to stay still. "You purchased a portion of the sky," he continued, tilting his head, watching Christopher's shadow instead of his face. "But you didn't read the fine print, did you?" Christopher's throat was dry. "I tried. The words, shift." The man's smile widened. "Ah, a pity." Christopher's fingers twitched toward the papers, hesitant. As his gaze scanned the shifting ink, He felt something slide beneath his skin, a displacement, subtle and wrong. His shadow twitched. Christopher stepped back. The man merely nodded as though this was expected. "We will speak again," he said, folding the papers, slipping them back inside the briefcase. Then he turned and walked directly into the space between moments, vanishing without a step. Chapter 3. The horror unfolds. Christopher no longer trusted mirrors. At first, the distortions had been subtle, the angle of a reflection not quite matching reality, the rain outside moving unnaturally, hovering in midair before reversing direction. He dismissed them as tricks of the light, fatigue, some unseen force of weather manipulation. Excuses. But what excuse could explain his shadow moving when he stood still? It began as a lag, a half-second delay, like an old film reel slightly out of sync. Then it twitched, adjusted its posture when he did not, and this morning, in the bathroom mirror, it turned its head toward him while he hadn't moved at all. His breath hitched. In the reflection, the silhouette at his feet lifted its hand, its fingers curling into letters. Christopher stumbled back, heart hammering, but the message remained imprinted on the tile floor. "Who are you really?" He didn't answer, didn't want to answer. His hands shook as he grabbed his coat and left his apartment, avoiding his own reflection entirely. At the office, things had worsened. Other coworkers had started noticing shifts, not just in Christopher, but in themselves. Their shadows dragged slower, sometimes pausing mid-step. Some claimed their reflections mouthed words they hadn't spoken. One man, pale and sweating, confessed in the break room that his shadow had left his feet entirely for 5 full seconds before snapping back in place. No one talked about the contracts, but Christopher knew. The man who rented the sky had left them with something they couldn't comprehend, and the further they strayed from the conditions, the fine print none of them could truly read, the worse it became. He tried to ignore his shadow, keeping his eyes forward, refusing to acknowledge its flickers in his peripheral vision, refusing to let it become something else. But then, at his desk, in broad daylight, it stepped out of his body. Not by inches, not hesitantly. It rose from the floor, standing beside him, a figure of perfect darkness. Christopher couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His shadow turned its head. No features, no face, just the unmistakable sense of a gaze. Then, without hesitation, it walked away. And Christopher felt himself fade in its absence. Chapter 4. The escape. Or the twist Christopher was unraveling. He could feel it, not physically, but in the way the world bent around him, in the way his name no longer fit in his mouth, in the slow erosion of his own presence. The absence of his shadow hollowed him out, like a puzzle piece removed from the fabric of existence. His co-workers had stopped looking at him, or maybe they couldn't see him anymore. The contract had done this, and the man, the one who rented the sky, had known all along. Breaking the lease outright wasn't an option. He understood that now. The fine print had ensured it. The ink had moved when he tried to read it, obscuring the conditions that tethered him to something beyond human comprehension. If he tore it apart, burned it, erased his signature, none of it would matter. The contract wasn't physical. It was binding in a way language couldn't contain. Christopher had only one option left. He had to trick the sky renter. The thought was absurd. Who had ever deceived something that did not obey human logic? The man had stepped between moments, bending reality to his whim, enforcing contracts that altered the very concept of self. Yet Christopher had no choice. The only way to negotiate was to act as if he hadn't noticed his own unraveling. So he waited, and, as expected, the man came to him. Once again, he arrived without warning, standing by the window of Christopher's office, gazing at the sky that shimmered with impossible colors. "You've deviated," the man said, voice carrying layers of sound, as though something else spoke beneath his words. "Your shadow has separated." Christopher forced a smile. He had practiced it, made sure it felt real, like he wasn't fraying at the edges, like he wasn't losing himself. "Temporary setback," he said, affecting indifference. "I assume there's a clause for that." The man turned to him, eyes dark as the spaces between stars. He said nothing. Christopher continued, I can't renegotiate the contract. I know that. But surely there's a provision, He paused, feigning hesitation. A transfer? The man's smile pressed against reality, like something too precise. A transfer? Christopher nodded. Give it to someone else. Let them inherit my lease. A buyout. A clause. Some way to pass the contract on. The silence between them stretched. Then, the man took a step forward, and Christopher felt the world shift. The man reached into his briefcase, pulled out another contract, identical to the first. He placed it on the desk. You may transfer, he said. Christopher's pulse slammed against his ribs. It worked. He didn't hesitate. He signed. And in the moment the ink touched paper, he felt the weight lift. His shadow snapped back into place, body solidifying, presence returning. His name settled in his mind again. He was Christopher Lang, and the unraveling had ceased. But the contract remained. And somewhere, someone else, someone who had never agreed to sign, now bore the weight of the lease. Christopher didn't question it. He didn't dare. Outside, the sky watched.